Today, and Macron lost his majority. What's the implications of that? All that plus Rwanda coming up after the headlines.
And meaningful talks are taking place in Scotland. We'll have more on that as the day comes through. Right now, it's 9:32. I'll be back at 10 o'clock to give you an update on all the day's news.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your and on your radio. Now, first this morning, what we're going to be talking about is strikes. Yes, that's right. Not just strikes to rail, but elsewhere too. Trade unions are threatening walkouts of teachers, NHS staff and postmen as part of a potential general strike this summer. It comes, of course, as rail workers prepare to take part in the biggest rail strike in modern history, with more than 40,000 workers walking out tomorrow, Thursday and on Saturday too, so make sure you plan your journeys accordingly. This wave of industrial action is expected to continue throughout the year, as unions ballot 1.5 million public sector workers on strike action. Now, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has hit out at the Labour Party for failing to condemn these strikes, calling for Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, to put people above the party coffers. Of course, the RMT, the union behind these strikes, has donated to many Labour Party politicians, although is not officially affiliated to that party. Labour, for their part, have hit out at the government, blaming them. So who is to blame and how do we make it through this mess? Well, earlier we spoke to travel expert Simon Calder, who had advice for anyone worried about getting around this week.
Start in the West Highlands of Scotland, if we may. If you've missed the 6:03 train from Malig connecting to go through to London, I'm afraid there won't be another one for another week that will allow you to make that journey. We're going to see cancellations starting mostly this evening, so it could be that your last train is a lot earlier than it would be. And then from tomorrow, there is going to be a kind of 20% service on 50% of the network. So if you're lucky enough to live on one of the main lines, particularly in and out of London, and you're travelling between about 7:30 and 6:30, 7:30 in the morning, 6:30 in the evening, then actually, unlike the strikes we saw in the 1980s, you are going to be able to get where you need to be. That applies to the East Coast Main Line, the West Coast Main Line, the GWR line from Bristol and Cardiff into London. Trains from places like Brighton, from Southampton will be running, but at a far lower level. Interesting, your question about people supporting the strike. I think all of us would say, yeah, public service sector workers should be getting a decent reward for the work they've put in. But a lot of people are saying, hang on, they've kind of pushed the nuclear button first rather than talking and trying to get people where they need to be. On top of all the disruption, of course, we're seeing at the airports right now, this is the last thing the travelling public needs. First of all, find out if your local station is going to have any trains. And again, it's terribly unfair for people in Scotland and in Wales. There is nothing going north of Glasgow or west of Cardiff. It's that there's very little service in those two nations, and it's once again kind of London gets all the breaks. But there will be quite a lot. If you're travelling by road, then allow extra time, of course, because there will be more congestion. The long distance bus companies are doing really well, but many of their services are sold out. But while the train companies are basically saying, don't travel unless you absolutely have to. Of course, many people will absolutely have to. And my advice to them is just start early and plan to finish early. For instance, the last northbound train from London King's Cross tomorrow to Edinburgh leaves at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's still going to be absolute mayhem tomorrow. The rosters are done well in advance, and you simply cannot go from a planned service of 20% of trains on 50% of routes to a full service. Just wouldn't happen. And furthermore, I can't see any sign of the two sides getting together. In a sense, Eamon, the union wants a strike because it wants to prove it can bring the country to a standstill once more, and the government, which ultimately is behind this, wants to prove that actually the country can carry on even if the rail unions are on strike. It's a horrible situation, of course, with the passenger caught right in the middle.
Travel expert Simon Calder there on the passenger side of things. Well, let's get into the politics now. I'm delighted to be joined by Kelvin Mackenzie, the former editor of The Sun newspaper, of course. Kelvin, thanks for joining us this morning. There's an extraordinary blame game going on at the moment. The Labour Party is blaming the Tories are blaming the Labour Party, and the unions, of course, are at loggerheads with the rail operating companies. Who's to blame here?
Well, I mean, it's quite understandable that people want a pay rise. I quite understand that. The question is, who is going to fund it? So we already have the most expensive rail tickets in Europe. So as a regular commuter, I don't want to fund it. Secondly, the government, thanks to putting up its taxes because of the 400 billion we erroneously spent on furlough and bounce back loans, right? We now have the dearest tax, the highest taxes for, I don't know, something like 60 years. So the taxpayer doesn't want to fund it. So they have an issue. They are hitting two huge boulders. And so I agree with the general view that this is not going to be solved anytime soon. What I object to is the fact that I am, as a commuter, used as a battering ram to force these nationalised businesses to pay money that they don't possess. Where is that money going to come from? It's either going to come from the passenger who doesn't want to pay, or from the taxpayer who is already paying the highest tax rates for 6 decades. There is no simple solution. And having a load of people coming on from the trade union side talking about, oh, this is a battle for the working classes, we're the bulwark of the working classes, is not helpful. You need an intellect on it. Jobs have got to be lost. People just have to accept that. People are going to be fired. Well, what a surprise that is. People are fired every single day. Nobody gets on the front page of the papers. And so the unions have got to accept some pain. And the question is, does the taxpayer or the nationalised industry have the money to pay them? I suspect they don't. This is going to go on for a very, very long time.
Have we become infantilized in how we view politics now? We sort of had 2 years where the government spent an extraordinary sum of money thinking that sort of spending can solve every problem, that we don't have to take any pain at any time. It feels like now there are very few people who are willing to sort of stand up and say, well, actually, at some point there are consequences for what has taken place. No one's fault, of course. No one expected a virus to come and sweep the world. But passenger numbers still today are about only 80% of passenger numbers before the pandemic. So not only have costs gone up to run these services, but the amount of money these services are generating have gone down. Surely restructuring becomes inevitable in this circumstances. How do we get to that stage?
Well, this is a very, very interesting point. So the left, who run the RMT and run most of the other unions as well, say, not on our watch. We're going to fight you tooth and nail. And the question that comes to it all is everybody says, I've got my hand out. I want you to put money in it. Where is that money coming from? As a country, we are not doing well. I don't necessarily blame Boris Johnson for this. I definitely blame COVID for it, but we are not doing well. But this hasn't stopped. This hasn't stopped our friends in the trade union movement saying, well, actually, we don't care whether you're skin or not skin. We are not going to have to suffer. But they're not the only people that are going to have to suffer. The teachers are going to have to suffer. The doctors are going to have to suffer. All the state workers, and this is where we come to another change that I'd like to see in the law. We cannot have a situation where when we run into difficult economic times, then certain groups of employees simply say, we don't care. We are in a powerful position. We are going to either not treat you, not teach your children, or not run your railways, or as in the old days, not give you energy by digging coal out of the ground. We are going to hold you to ransom till you pay. We haven't got the money. So I think that Boris and co, I don't know whether Boris has got a backbone or not. I'm very, very surprised at some of his reactions these days. Simply got to turn out and say, I'm afraid the cupboard's bare, and we are all of us going to have to take some pain. Yes, the very wealthy will not take the pain, right? But I'm afraid all the rest of us are going to have to receive it.
Is this politically feasible? The last time we saw a situation like this, we got into a really damaging wage price spiral where prices were going up, inflation was crazy. It reached over 20% in the mid-1970s. And that was pushed not only by policy that was loose on the monetary side of things, but also you had this situation where strong unions were demanding higher wages, and that pushed up prices, and then the prices demanded higher wages, and the wages went up, and you got this self-destructive spiral that helped absolutely no one. It took incredibly tough action to stop that spiral, and actually that spiral hurts the poorest the most. Are we at risk of entering a similar spiral this summer with other unions looking to follow the RMT now too?
Right. Well, of course, I am, as you might be surprised to learn, Tom, old enough to remember the 70s. It was beyond shocking. And what happened? Well, in 1979, after Callaghan had said, crisis, what crisis, right? And this is where people weren't being buried and there was rubbish on the streets and everything. We ended up with Margaret Thatcher, and we ended up with a boom period, and we ended in a complete matter of change. Yes, it was divisive, but when people went to the country, they all voted, we want Thatcher. People are prepared to take the pain if they can see what the end game is. And the question we're now coming to now is the RMT, is the National Education Union, is a mixture of the BMA and the nurses and the this and the BT engineers and God knows who else. Is this a massive crunch? And if I were the Tories, I would say, we haven't got the money. We cannot pay you. We're so sorry. We can give you 3%. We might even give you 4%. And I tell you what, if you were the RMT and you changed some of your disgraceful practices, we might even give you 4.5%. But if you want 11%, I'm afraid that is not possible. Until we decide that we are strong enough to do this, I'm afraid this is likely to go on for many, many months and will be more damaging as Labour actually have worked out. It's going to be, the length of it will be more damaging for the Conservatives, because people in the end will say, I don't really care how much it is, I'm just going to write a cheque. Well, they would be mad, but that is what happens. People have become very, very weak.
And it's interesting mentioning Margaret Thatcher there, because she used to say, yes, the medicine is harsh, but the patient requires it. And that was almost followed up in a funny sort of way by the Cameron era in government, where they said the words long-term economic plan implied that there needed to be some pain now for gain later. Is this government anywhere close to that level of thinking? It seems like this government sort of wants to chase popularity, can't stand unpopularity in the short term, even if it makes things better in the long term.
Yeah, so Boris turned out to be a surprise in the sense that he would rather write the check and send you away happy than rather be negative. I mean, Blair said the toughest word in politics is no. And that is true in business, and it is true in life, and it's even true with your family. Boris doesn't understand this because, as far as Boris is concerned, there is no word. It doesn't matter how many wives there are, how many children there are, how many MPs there are. The answer is yes. How can I make you happy? How can I send you away with a smile? There is no way that there can be a happy ending to the RMT dispute and its tentacles as it goes out into nursing, doctoring, teaching, whatever.
Well, we've got to find some backbone within our politicians. We'll see if that takes place over this summer. Somehow, I doubt it from any side of the fence. But for now, Kelvin Mackenzie, thanks so much for talking through this enormous issue that will no doubt run and run. Well, now turning our sights across the Channel. This morning, France's President Macron has awoken to an uncomfortable election result. The recently re-elected president was hoping to win a majority in the National Assembly in order to deliver on his agenda, of course. Yet last night, his centrist coalition took a hammering from both the left and the right. While still the largest bloc in the National Assembly, Macron-affiliated Ensemble! It's the only bloc to include an exclamation mark in their official name. It's down by almost 100 seats compared to the previous election. Let's take a look at what happened. Back in 2017, Macron swept to power not only in the presidency, but also 2 months later in the legislative elections. His group won 350 out of 577 seats, a large majority. Marine Le Pen's party won just 8 seats. They're represented, for those watching on television, in the tiny little dots in black on the right there. And the left-wing MPs won 58 seats. Well, this time around, it's very, very different. This time around, while some sources differ on the early numbers, the result is nevertheless clear. Macron's affiliates are down to 245 seats, over 100 lower than their 2017 total. Le Pen, meanwhile, has grown from 8 to 88, an enormous rise in her vote. And the hard left bloc, led by Marxist firebrand Jean-Luc Mélenchon, have scored 131 seats, well up on the total won by the parties within this new bloc last time around. Well, what does this mean for France? Joining me now is French journalist Nabila Ramdani. Well, thanks for joining me, Nabila. It's really good to have you on the programme. I suppose, first of all, this is going to be a challenge for Macron. He's going to have to make friends in order to govern. What are his options?
Well, good morning, Tom, and thank you for having me. As you quite rightly said, on the face of it, this is a pretty disastrous result for Emmanuel Macron. I mean, he's just been elected president for the second term, and for the least he would get is a reasonable working majority of 289 seats out of 577. But even the centrist coalition that he built, Ensemble, together, failed to achieve that. And as you quite rightly said, his alliance is on more or less 240 seats at the moment. I mean, the projected results are pretty accurate at this stage. They reflect 95% of the counted votes. So 240 seats at the moment or so in the National Assembly, which is the equivalent of the House of Commons. Remarkably, you highlighted the gains of the far right, historical gains for the far right, and also the far left coalition of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, which achieved massively successful results this time around. It has to be highlighted that the president's own ministers today described his failure as a democratic shock, and they said it could hinder the capacity to block the president to indeed reform and indeed to protect the French. It has to be said as well that the French papers are particularly damning. I mean, you've got the headlines in the Economics Daily, Les Echos, who called it an earthquake, while the left-wing Libération paper said it was a slap for Mr. Macron. And the last time a newly elected head of state failed to get an outright majority in parliamentary elections was in 1988, when the socialist François Mitterrand was forced into what is called a cohabitation with a conservative prime minister. So what does this mean for Macron, and will he be able to govern? Well, the situation means that Macron will have to rely on other parties to get his legislation through. He had avoided that possibility so far, but he will now have to forge new alliances. Remember
I suppose
Yes.
the question there is, who will he try to work with? There's the very far left bloc, which is made up of some other parties, some smaller ones within it. Will they split? Will he probably... It would be extraordinary if he were to work with Marine Le Pen's group. There's also Les Républicains, who have gone down by a considerable number, but the sort of centre-right party there, they could be a potential partner. Who will Macron seek to work with in order to try and get an agenda of any kind through?
Well, Macron has always made it clear that he would avoid working with the extremes. And what he means by the extremes, they include the far-left coalition headed by Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He created the NUPS group, which stands for New Popular Social Union of Ecology. It's effectively a left-wing coalition of different groups, socialists, communists, Greens, and the like minority groups on the left. And there's also the other extreme, the far right of Marine Le Pen, the National Rally, which is not a consideration at all for Mr. Macron. Remember that Macron is seeking to push quite radical legislation, especially in financial terms. He wants to bring in legislation that he knows will annoy a lot of French people, business-friendly legislation, for example, to increase the retirement age from 62 to 65, or bring in policies that will make it easier for bosses to hire and fire people. So his most likely alliance to achieve that would be to turn to Les Républicains and other centrist minority groups like the UDI or the DVD. They're his most natural allies. But there's no guarantee at all that, I mean, they are, for the moment, projected to gain 78 seats, so that would get him over the line to push through his radical legislation. But if there's no possible alliance even with those groups, then Macron might have to seek to make a deal on a bill-by-bill basis. And if the paralysis continues, nevertheless, then Macron may even have to call another snap parliamentary elections. But I think one important point, however, to bear in mind is that the president remains the most powerful institution in France by far. Macron is fully aware that the system allows him actually to bypass parliament in many areas of government. And he's already resorted to ruling by decrees in his previous administration. And he can do that pretty much instantly. He can even appoint much of his government from outside of parliament. Remember that his prime minister, before the current one, Jean Castex, who was a civil servant, for example, Emmanuel Macron himself has never been an MP himself. And that would surprise a lot of your viewers, because it just shows how different the French system is to the British one.
Really different, but a very unstable or unstable time, I suppose, coming up in the next few years in French politics. Just a final point in this conversation. It's been extraordinary, the demise of the centre-left in recent years. The president who preceded Macron, Hollande, was a member of the Socialist Party, the centre-left party. And now that party has sort of been absorbed into this bloc of extremists. What on earth has gone on with the centre-left in France?
Well, yes, indeed, that's quite a notable development in French politics. And I think Mr. Macron himself has a lot to do with the demise of the centre. He came in as somebody who branded himself as an independent. So he took as many votes as possible from the centre-right and indeed from the socialists themselves. But he's in his first term in office, he very much was branded the president of the rich because of his business-friendly policies. and he came across as somebody who was not interested in the grievances of ordinary people that are primarily worried about the cost of living, for example. So that allowed the extreme left and the extreme right to capitalize on those very important issues and led to the surge of those parties.
Yeah, really, really interesting results there. Nabila Ramdani, thank you so much for talking us through them. A really, really interesting conversation there. Appreciate your time this morning. Well, that's it for the programme this morning. Coming up, it's To The Point with Mercy and Nana. But first, here's the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, in the UK is looking dry and fine for many. The far northwest will see some rain. Let's take a quick look at the details. So the southwest of England this lunchtime will see plenty of sunshine, just a little cloud from time to time. Winds will be a little lighter, allowing it to feel warmer. The southeast of England will also see sunny skies, allowing temperatures to climb towards 20 Celsius by lunchtime. East Anglia may see a little more cloud, but it's still dry here. Skies could be a little hazier at times across Wales. It shouldn't spoil things with plenty of fine and dry weather on offer. In the Midlands, it's a similar story with plenty of sunshine. A reminder though, grass pollen levels will be really high and UV levels will also be high with the summer solstice, of course, tomorrow. Across the northeast of England, the dry and bright weather will also be here. Skies may turn hazy at times, especially across Cumbria and Northumberland. Temperatures this lunchtime will be around 16 to 18 Celsius. In Scotland, most of the country will see plenty of fine and dry weather. Towards the northwest, we will be seeing a band of cloud and rain slowly moving in. In Northern Ireland, the band of cloud and rain should stay clear, giving a dry and sunny lunchtime across the country with temperatures around 18 Celsius. So across the UK then, little changes throughout the afternoon, with most of us enjoying a pleasant summer's day with plenty of sunshine.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. What day is it today?
Monday. It's Monday. It's Monday the 20th.